planning a public celebration. Flyers were distributed to surrounding communities, and in the first days of July 1893, upwards of 800 people flocked to the tiny settlement to witness the feat, some traveling for 2 or 3 days for the celebration. On the morning of July 4th, Bill Rogers wore an Uncle Sam suit as he climbed the ladder bearing a flag which he planted in the thin soil at the top. Well, as you can imagine, that flag didn't last long in the notoriously fierce Wyoming wind. But the party went on all night and began a tradition that has survived to this day, the Old Settlers Picnic. In the late 1800s, the easiest route is susceptible to Mother Nature's fickle mood swings, and there's almost nowhere to hide from, for example, an unexpected hailstorm. Coupled with the incredible height of the climb, hanging from a rope on the side of Devil's Tower is no place to be when inclement weather strikes. Not only are the predictable consequences uncomfortable and generally rather unsafe, but it's also a long way to go in either direction if you need to get out of the situation. For these and many other reasons, climbing Devil's Tower is a badge of honor for enthusiasts of the sport the world over. Depending on the number of people in the climbing group, it can take anywhere from 4 hours to an entire day to scale the rock and then return safely to the bottom before dark. Along with weather considerations and the requirement to register with the Park Service beforehand, precise planning is absolutely necessary. In addition, certain routes are also closed in the late spring and early summer to protect nesting falcons, and climbers generally adhere to a voluntary closure of sorts during June out of respect for the indigenous ceremonies that happen around that time. I'm sure that like everyone else who has ever traveled this way, you're going to find the view of Devil's Tower really is quite the anomaly, sitting upright in the gentle prairie hills. As we approach the entrance to Devil's Tower, why don't we take a second to talk a little bit about how best to visit this amazing geological wonder. There are lots of ways to experience Devil's Tower. Though short of rock climbing, we'll have to admire it from the base. But the very first thing we need to do is plan on where we're going to park. Parking is limited at the monument, and spots can be a little bit difficult to find, especially between the hours of 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in summer. If we're arriving during this time, we'll just need a little bit of patience and maybe a little bit of luck to find a great spot. Though in theory, visitors will be constantly arriving and departing. We have a couple of different options when it comes to parking. There's the main visitor center lot, the picnic area lot, and then the small gravel parking area near the Joyner Ridge trailhead. The main visitor center lot is the primo location, being the most convenient parking to the tower itself. But as you can imagine, it's the first lot to fill up. The visitor center lot is the best for standard-sized passenger vehicles, since oversized spots for RVs and trailers are pretty limited here. The picnic area lot is the best option if we're driving a longer vehicle or a trailer. In fact, if we're towing, we can even leave our trailer here and drive up onto the visitor center lot. If no parking is available at the of kitschy souvenirs and t-shirts, as well as a snack bar that serves lunch and dinner, and an ice cream parlor. That's very important to know too. Over on our right, we'll find the Devil's Tower KOA, which is a rather large private campground, notable for hosting nightly outdoor showings of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Nice work, friends. We've made it through the entrance gate and are officially in Devil's Tower National Monument. We're about to cross the Belfouche River. That means beautiful fork in French. Once we cross the Belfouche, we'll be entering Prairie Dog Town. The park's Prairie Dog Town spans over 40 acres near the river and is home to some 600 residents. As we pass through Prairie Dog Town, there are several turnouts where you can pull off and watch prairie dogs poke their heads out of the burrows and bark at the visitors. All right, we're almost there. If we're arriving in a regular-sized passenger car, at the stop sign, we can either head right to the park in the lower gravel lot or go left to try to find a spot in the paved lot. The paved lot is closest to the visitor center, so it's the first lot to fill, and often stays full for most of the day. RVs and larger vehicles will want to follow the one-way traffic all the way around the main lot and then exit the way you came in. There are several long vehicle parking spots along the outbound lane. Keep an eye out for the open spots as we pass that way into the main parking area. If no long vehicle spots are open, we'll have to go back down to the picnic area parking lot to either drop off our trailer or park our RV.
That is pretty neat. Pretty cool. Spearfish Canyon.
Geologists and hydrologists who've studied this area think that even if the water was not diverted, this would still actually happen naturally because of the limestone sinkholes downstream from here. Although there are some valid arguments that the water should be allowed to flow freely, particularly by fly fishers and conservationists. By diverting the water, the city is able to both generate electricity and keep the river flowing at a steady rate through town after it passed through the power plant. If the water was never diverted by the intake, no one is entirely sure when or where it would resurface because of all the sinkholes. Now you may be wondering where exactly the water goes after it's diverted. In fact, it's all been fed into pipes that have been tunneled for 5 miles beneath the cliffs in order to protect the system from rock slides, flooding, and weathering. The way the generator works is that the water builds up energy over the course of its 700-foot vertical drop. Plant, the water is channeled into 3 pipes that have a 3-foot diameter at the top. The pipes then get progressively smaller as they go along, which increases the water pressure as it approaches the plant. At the terminus of the pipe, the water shoots out a 6-inch nozzle onto water wheels that generate the electricity. Constructed back in 1910, the system still works today, providing power for about 2,000 homes. building by the side of the road. You can't miss it. From there, you'll walk about 5 minutes downstream to the trailhead, which follows a smaller inlet stream. There's lots of private property in this area, so please be mindful and stay on established trails. To serving as the parking lot for the Devil's Bathtub Trail, the Homestake No. 2 hydroelectric plant is a pretty interesting history in itself. Established in 1917, 5 years after its sister Hydro No. 1 opened at the mouth of the canyon, this small plant used diversion pipes and tunnels upstream in Savoy to generate electricity for the massive Homestake mine. In addition to providing lighting and ventilation fans deep within the mine, the two hydroelectric plants generated enough power to crush excavated ore in the mills. Looking at Spearfish Creek, you may wonder how such a relatively small amount of water could provide enough electricity for an operation as large as Homestake. The answer lies in gravity. From its source high up in the Black Hills, the river drops a total of 3,000 vertical feet over the course of 40 miles, and the flow rate that creates drives the turbines. If you're interested in hiking to the Devil's Bathtub or checking out the exterior of the hydroelectric plant, we'll see space to park in front of the old brick power plant. For a century, people have been driving through this canyon, though there wasn't always much of a road. The first automobiles to drive through the canyon followed the predecessor to Highway 14, which was then called the Black and Yellow Trail, because it ran from the Black Hills to Yellowstone. As a matter of fact, the scenic route actually began in Chicago and was part of a larger national movement to create and improve a connected network of interstate roads. Although in this particular case, the idea was to direct traffic straight through South Dakota. Because there were no highways at the time, roads were not named according to numbers, but instead were called trails. In this case, the only way you knew you were on the right road was if you saw a sign marked with a horizontal yellow stripe sandwiched in between two black stripes. Despite the good intentions, road construction was slow going in the early days. The route was first established in 1913, and up until 1920, it consisted for the most part of no more than a dirt path. As one Mr. Elmer Juckett wrote in the Hot Springs Weekly Star in 1917, the road over the so-called Black and Yellow Trail between Pierre and Rapid City is a joke, as any tourist who has been over it will testify. Poorly marked and never graded, it was but one single track or rut made by cars which every tourist must follow. Pretty sure I got his impression down perfect. If that was the condition of the main road connecting two of South Dakota's largest cities, we can only imagine what driving through an area as remote as Spearfish Canyon must have been like. We'll soon be reaching Savoy, an old sawmill town near the top of the canyon. Here we'll find the Spearfish Canyon Lodge, the jumping off point for several canyon short walks and hikes. Across from the lodge is the former McLaughlin Tie and Timber Sawmill building, now the Latch String Restaurant, an excellent spot to take a break and get a bite to eat. When we arrive at the lodge, we'll have several options. If we turn at the junction in Savoy, up the gravel forest service road, we can visit Roughlock Falls. The Overlook Trail is only 3 minutes away from the turn, so you don't need to worry about the road being unpaved. From the Roughlock Falls parking lot, it's a very short walk along Little Spearfish Creek to the falls. This 50-foot multi-tiered cascade is not the canyon's largest, but the setting is marvelous, and the accessible trail ensures that anyone can visit. For a slightly longer hike, a 1-mile trail leads from the Spearfish Lodge. This waterfall got its name, Roughlock, from the pioneer days, when travelers in covered wagons would have to lock their wheels in place in order to navigate the steep descents. This way, the wheels would only skid instead of roll, allowing them to travel at a more manageable speed. Driving a further 4 minutes up the Forest Service Road takes us to the Dances with Wolves film site. In the movie, this is the location of the Sioux winter camp during their fight with the U.S. Army, and where Kevin Costner's character, John Dunbar, separates from the tribe for the final time. As most of the scenes are shot from the clifftop perspective, it can be a little hard to recognize the area at first glance, but spend a bit of time here and it'll all come back to fans of the movie. Look for a small, unassuming sign to know that you're in the right place. Back at the lodge, regardless of whether we choose to drive up the forest road or not, are more opportunities for hiking. Spearfish Falls is one
Spearfish Canyon. This place is incredible. Pretty cool.
the few blocks of downtown, and then I'll bring us back on this road towards Lead. Now, while we're on Main Street, don't be surprised if there's a shootout. They happen 3 times a day in summer, and the reenactment of the shooting of Wild Bill Hickok and the trial of Jack McCall kicks off in summer at about 7:30 daily, also out on Main Street. On our way to downtown, I'll point out the turn for the Adams House. This museum is located in a Queen Anne-style mansion built in 1892. There are easy signs you can follow. Stay straight for downtown. ahead on our left, just after the post office, with its huge columns, we'll see the attractive brick building that houses the Adams Museum. It's filled with all manner of historical artifacts, and they do a pretty great job of telling the story of Deadwood. Definitely worth a visit if we have time and interest. We'll turn right at the stop sign here to continue. Main Street is 1 block on our left, parallel to us now. We'll turn left at the traffic light ahead to join Main Street. Deadwood is not a place built on the concept of free parking. They gotta make some money somehow, right? Except there is free parking available at the Visitor Welcome Center at the corner when we turn. Now, it is possible we may have a hard time finding parking at all. And if that is the case, keep these lots here in mind if we have to loop around, okay? If we were to go past the traffic lights, the Days of 76 is an outdoor museum just a half-mile further along on our right.
Next left onto Wind Cave Road. Continue for 3/4 of a mile.
bring it under control. But even though wildfires threaten and destroy homes and communities, and are thus perceived as natural disasters, natural fires are actually good. In South Dakota, wildfires help to maintain the balance between meadows and forests, helping to slow the spread of trees into grasslands. The overlapping boundaries between the two ecosystems are often among the most biodiverse areas in nature, and occasionally fires help to revitalize them. Bushes and grasses are among the first to colonize a burned area, benefiting from increased sunlight and nutrients that have been reintroduced to the soil. This in turn attracts large mammals, such as deer and elk, who graze the new tender shoots. Trees that have been burned become new homes for birds, such as the Lewis woodpecker, which nests in cavities that they could not otherwise form themselves. Meanwhile, water flow in fashion, and he eventually became the state historian, collecting artifacts and writing articles on South Dakota. It was while Robinson was serving as state historian that he read about a project at Georgia's Stone and Buffalo Bill. Borglum successfully argued for a national rather than regional theme, believing that the monument would have more appeal if it portrayed great American leaders instead. By hand using chisels. The final step involved smoothing out the rock face with a special attachment called a bumper. The air compressors used up quite a bit of electricity, and over the years there were occasional power outages as more and more households installed electric power to play. Well, anyway, 5 years later, he married his teacher, Elizabeth Putnam, who was 18 years his senior. Those newlyweds promptly moved to Paris, where Goodson enrolled in a private art school and met, of all people, Auguste Rodin. Whether or not Rodin was the one who convinced Borglum to take up sculpture is unclear, but it was during this time that he switched media. In 1901, Goodson's time in Europe had come to a close. Along with his marriage to Elizabeth, he returned to the United States and achieved the first flicker of national recognition when a bust he sculpted Grant and Saint down climbing the gully between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, only to have Saint's high-heeled shoe break, sending her for a near-fatal tumble. The last tunnel on Iron Mountain Road is the Scoville-Johnson Tunnel, named for the chief engineer and surveyor of the Black Hills Scenic Drives. This is another tunnel remarkable for its perfect positioning. Drivers from the other direction will be getting their first glimpse of Mount Rushmore, which the tunnel framed through a gap in the trees. Now we can pull over on the left-hand side just before the tunnel for a final wave goodbye if we feel the need. The next stop is the Norbeck Overlook, the high point of the Iron Mountain Road at 5,400 feet. We have a series of quite sharp switchbacks to climb through to get to this elevated perch. There's a big parking lot here, so there's no chance that we're going to miss it. I recommend taking the time to get out of the car and walk to the overlook for a spectacular view of Mount Rushmore, which is only a mile away as the crow flies. Peter Norbeck is an iconic figure in South Dakota history, and we've already mentioned him on this drive. He helped to found Custer State Park, the Needles Highway and Iron Mountain Road, and later as senator. A true son of South Dakota, Norbeck was born in a modest, sod home in 1870 in the eastern part of the state to Swedish-Norwegian parents. If you've never seen just how basic a sod house is, if you drive with me to the Badlands National Park, we can see one over by the eastern entrance of the park. He only had intermittent schooling throughout his life, but a charismatic personality and get-things-done attitude helped him to become an effective leader and conservationist. Before starting as a politician, he earned a living by drilling water wells for farmers, and he remained a champion of agriculture throughout his life. Known as a Prairie Republican, his later legacy in Washington, D.C. included investigations of Wall Street and new regulations designed to protect investors and prevent a reoccurrence of the Black Friday stock market crash, which brought on the Great Depression. Norbeck served as a South Dakota senator from 1920 to 1936, the year of his death. We really should be getting close to the overlook now, so let's pull in and enjoy the view. Picnic tables, and a hiking trail that you can explore. If you don't need the conveniences, however, it's perfectly fine to continue on without stopping here. We won't be missing out on any outstanding views. The next tunnel is named after Cecil Gideon, otherwise known as Cece, who was the architect of the Iron Mountain Road, the Pigtail Bridges, the State Game Lodge, and the Coolidge Inn. Cece grew up in Minnesota in the 1880s and worked as a carpenter and logger after finishing school in the 8th grade. He then moved on to home construction, and an architectural firm in Minneapolis eventually recommended him to the South Dakota Fish and Game Department in 1918. Cece traveled to Rapid City, where he met then-Senator Norbeck, and began work on the State Game Lodge shortly after. Work on the lodge took 3 years to complete, during which time Cece cemented his friendship with Norbeck and became heavily involved with conservation efforts within Custer State Park, doing everything from tending fences and herding bison to community outreach and leading horseback trips and campouts for VIPs like the Guggen. I want to take it slow as we approach the tunnel, as this is a marvel of clever design that's easy to miss. The tunnel entrance comes up after a tight right turn, and like the other tunnels, it's just 1 car wide. Immediately after exiting the tunnel, we'll pass over a wooden bridge. Then we'll make a tight corkscrew turn to pass under the bridge. As we pass under, you'll be able to look up and appreciate the simple, rough-hewn timber design used in the bridge's construction. But maybe even more intriguing, you'll see how the bridge basically attaches to the end of the tunnel. Did it have to be built this way? Or were Gideon and Norbeck just wanting to make things interesting for self-driving visitors like us? This is the first corkscrew turn on the highway. I think their mission wasn't simply to create the easiest route. It was also to build something unique and fun. The next ones are known as the Pigtail Bridges. Next up is the Doane Robinson Tunnel, dedicated to the man who provided the original . right, the two pigtail bridges are just ahead, and I'll leave you to drive through them. Were the road architects just playing with us when they designed the first one to be left-handed, going counterclockwise, and the second one right-handed, going clockwise?